And how many customers when did you make that? Is there a certain number or like,
I think locations, we had about 80. Again, half of that being one
right,
customer.
right.
So it was enough where we weren't at 100, but we were close to it. Not all of them were live, but they were sold on like a some kind of Panda Doc esque agreement or a Word doc that I would send out. But I think around 80 locations or 20 unique operators, 30 unique operators. Depends on the ARPU, depends on a couple different things. But founders need to be doing the initial sales, but to do all the other things, depending on your founding team, depending on a lot of other elements, you need to be able to get leverage out of your position to do other things. And so you need to make sure you have to establish the product market
Mhm.
fit. Nobody else can do that. And you need to be able to feel confident that you put butts in seats. You start to hire leaders that you're not making them discover if your idea is good.
Right. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you
You're
need
not
to
trying to
bring
hire
that
people
all the
to
way
do
through.
like the research. You're like, hey, I gotta have proven this out to some degree to have some repeatability. I'm surprised that the LinkedIn kind of strategy worked. I thought these operators would be, out and about and, were they on LinkedIn? Did that work?
Nah, I mean, some of them are. I'd say it's more rare, but again, some of them they're not full time laundromat
Mhm.
owners, so they're doing other things.
Mm.
So it was. I'd say that really the most effective phone calls, yes, but a lot of operators don't want to deal with their phones. The form on websites of the small businesses, because those are largely being routed to the owner,
Mm.
not an employee. Phone call could be routed to the in-store employee, but the email largely and the contact form on their website largely went to them.
And were you just
And so
doing
that's where
like
I
were
would
you
hit
just
as
going to a
some.
website and just like filling out forms? Is that what you were doing?
Oh yeah, I do laundromats near me, and then click on their website. They had to have like a reasonably good enough website where I would feel like they would be interested in something new. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't an amazing hit rate, but it was probably 10-15%. I'd get a response,
And
and
did
it
you
and it
primarily
worked. I mean,
focus on New York, New Jersey, just because that's where you guys were based, or it sounds like
I
you
was
had your
actually
stuff in
living in
Chicago. You're in
I
Chicago.
was living in San Francisco at the time.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, so first we did that. Then we built a website and started to do some baseline SEO. And I did get some inbound on a type form. So type form was our first like lead form. And I did get some inbound. And that's when, because a lot of in the beginning of our business, we were 80% inbound
Mhm.
because people are looking for a solution. I think that's where investors got it wrong in the beginning. It's that you're in a nascent SMB market. They're not sophisticated. It's like any business owner wants to make their business better, or they want to achieve their goals faster. And their goal could be, I don't want to work in my business. I want to golf and hang out with my friends. Like it could be that. It could also, I want to own multiple locations. They're looking and they're interested in different things. And so we would get a ton of inbound, and the outbound worked for a large part of it. Like, we've had a pretty efficient sales motion, in the history of the company, for the most
And
part.
and tell me about how you were thinking about pricing the product in the early days, whether it's the LOI, like what advice do you have for founders as they're pricing their vertical solutions?
The advice I always give is you're doing better than you think you are, because I see companies all the time, the biggest public companies that are changing their price seemingly very frequently. And there's huge pricing strategy. The job is never done. I actually think we're kind of behind on pricing strategy. We started with $299 a month and you got everything. I think Margin Edge, I've seen a couple companies do that. It's pretty rare. Um, and the idea was like, I don't want to spend time thinking about what should be in which tier. I didn't want to think about gating anything. We just wanted to deploy product as fast as possible. And some operators would pay a little bit more for the features that because they weren't using some features, and some operators were getting way more value because they're using all of them. We wanted to incentivize usage of every single part of our product, and not like you're making a buying decision to grow your business and make it better. You should be making, like, our initial idea was, you make one buying decision, from there it's usage, optionality, digitization. That was really effective to target a particular kind of operator who is willing to invest. It eliminated a lot of the down market customers, because our competitors, while not sophisticated, were $80 a month.
Mhm.
So we were nearly four times the cost, and in some cases had less features applicable because we were just a newer business.
Mhm.
And so, we wanted to maintain price integrity, but this all-in-one solution for all-in-one pricing, on a per location basis, made our sale just faster and more transparent. And so today we have tiered pricing, and we're doing a pricing exercise actually, now, Now we can get into tiered pricing and different, packaging concepts because we have a more sophisticated go-to-market motion.
Hmm.
We have a broader product line that's like proven and durable with ROI analysis and case studies and all of that. In the beginning, we just want to be like, all you got to do is pay this one thing, and we work for you,
Hmm.
and you can have everything you could possibly want. It made our sales motion faster, and it was a more targeted ICP because of the price point.
It,
So I
and
think that
you got
getting too cute on pricing can be hard in the beginning.
yeah. So you're just like keep it simple. And how did you land on this 299? I mean, was this hey, let's talk to your first 20 customers and see what they're willing to spend, or was there a different sort of exercise?
I mean, honestly, it's kind of a throw the dart kind of thing. I wish it was more sophisticated. We looked at our competitors, and there's one competitor that was more than that or around that, maybe one or two, but it really just felt like that's a good number. That like makes sense on value. I think we're delivering a lot of value at that price, and it looked right in our P&L. It looked right on ARPU. It looked right on a lot of areas. And we looked at Toast. We looked at all these companies, but we did some research. But honestly, it wasn't as sophisticated as maybe some people might think.
And you said, you got to about 80 locations, 20 kind of customers, and you said, okay, now we're ready to hire. Tell me about how you thought about what was the right hire at that time. What did you look for? Was there something about a profile of someone that really stood out that said, this is the type of sales hire we need for our company for the products we're selling?
Interestingly enough, Kevin was the first hire we ever had that wasn't a warm connection. Our our now SVP of engineering was the CTO of our last company. Our head of hardware was a mutual friend. My co-founder is my brother-in-law. Our at the time director of ops, now senior director of product ops, and senior director of experience were all worked with Gilead House and Ivy. Uh, like we had a connection. Our director of marketing was I went to college with him. We had some level of connection. Kevin was the only one we didn't have, and that's largely because one, I didn't have a network of go to market leaders. Kevin had the background in SMB, kind of high transactional sales motion as well as more relationship driven from Angie's List and Home Advisor, and then another company that he was at based in Denver. He had a temperament where he understood how to build a sales motion. I mean, he was hiring and firing 40 or 50 reps a week or a month at Home Advisor. I mean, it was such a revolving door, but he knew how to build tenure and relationships with people. So we knew that 6 months after we hired him, he was able to bring on a lot of people that he had worked with in the past. Like, good leaders can recruit and bring on talent and are easy to reference check from that standpoint. We just wanted somebody that was willing to roll up their sleeves. I describe Kevin as if you have an unsolvable problem, but tell him that there's a solution, he actually ends up finding a solution to the unsolvable problems and is just willing to really act like an owner and do the hard work and do the hard stuff early. But at the same time, it was just a gut thing. I think early hires are just like your gut. Do you connect with them on a personal level? Do you believe in them? Do they believe in you? You're making an equal bet. You're giving them equity of a company with basically no value, and they're leaving a job with stability and growth trajectory to get early and basically make a psychotic decision in doing that. And so you have to feel right in your gut in the early days. Again, in this world of AI and huge amounts of capital to very young founders or just very early stage businesses, I'm sure a lot of venture capital firms and other folks are helping founders be like remarkably strategic or try to find somebody with an amazing LinkedIn. But the more amazing the LinkedIn, the more I want to double click on, is this a person that I can actually connect with and have a beer and feel confident when shit's bad and not be looking over my shoulder that people just want to be at the sexy, cool companies. So gut was the large driver of, I just believed in Kevin. I felt like he understood what we were trying to do, understood SMB motion, and I'd rather make a bet and get it wrong than try to overanalyze it.
And I know you talked about this in the past, but you made this decision to hire CS relatively early. And if I recall, like you actually hired CS before sales. Is that correct?
We we hired CS right after sales. It was maybe the hire or two after sales.
And what was the thinking behind it?
And it
Was it
was
just like, hey, we just need to make sure the adoption because of this all-in-one kind of positioning? Was it all about like we need to make sure that they're getting value here?
Yeah, I think that our competitors were not sophisticated, but we had them. And so if we're going to convince somebody to go to a product with less features, which is what we had, in an earlier company with theoretically more risk, the one thing we would not, we would do unequivocally was deliver a better service and deliver better customer care and deliver better support and direct support and hands-on support, which and customer success. Interestingly enough, I did not believe early on that customer success should be in the go-to-market function. I did not want a transaction based and economic based relationship with care and the customer early on because I didn't want them to feel like when they're getting on their customer success manager, they're going to feel like they're going to be upsold. And that was the beauty of an all in one pricing. And so all in one pricing enabled us to have CS that was largely a support and care driven organization, not a product demo and expansion because we were just early. I didn't have a lot of stuff for them to expand to, and everything they had was in product. So we really focused on an ops-driven CS function with Sivan, who is now our senior director of product operations. She ran operations and what was the CS team underneath that in the ops because it wasn't supposed to be revenue generating. And early on, we weren't thinking about sophisticated comp plans and retention metrics and all that. We were just like, build a great product and kill yourself for the customer. The rest we'll figure out over time. But especially I see on a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews with different founders and a lot of the angel investors, advisors I have, you realize that the more time I spent with other companies, the more I realized ours is unique. And the more we tried to be like Toast, like Olo, like Jobber, like Slice, like whatever, the more we realize like, man, we're breaking trying to be other companies. It really, like, this stuff is just way simpler. If you build a great product, you price it in a way where the cost is less than the value that it generates, and you have amazing support and customer success, it can be a no-brainer to a lot of the customers. And over time, you just need to have that same thing that scales.
Hey, this is Ben Kesnoka, co-founder of Village Global. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Village Global podcast, where we go deep on all of the biggest topics in tech. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to see you for the next one.